We're back with season 12 on boundaries, and we're calling this season an invitation to love. And Brenda, we're about to get in the weeds, I think.
We were already talking before we got on about some weeds I'm in, and I'm just realizing what a mess I'm in, what a pickle. So, we're thinking, we're going to talk about how to set boundaries today. Let's listen, because this is going to be a nice little neat formula. And we're like, no, there are no formulas. There's just frameworks. But yeah, this is hard stuff, Alex.
Yeah, I think it's easy to talk about these as principles or frameworks until there's a real person that we put in our mind. And as soon as that real person is in our mind, then all of a sudden it gets very complex. And I think that's good for us to remember. And I hope people will do that even as they think about these principles. Is we're not going to be able to answer every question, but we do want to help give some handholds maybe as they think about what it's like to set boundaries. So today we're going to talk about how to set boundaries. We have been covering the topics of what are boundaries, what is the biblical foundation for boundaries, when are boundaries needed, and we keep repeating these ideas that boundaries are an invitation, they're not a rejection. And when you're confident in what you will do and what you will not do, then pressure from other people can become less threatening. And I would say we're more able to love well, which is why we've titled this season An Invitation to Love. So today we're going to get practical and talk about what it looks like to take some steps in setting up boundaries.
Yeah. And the first step seems so obvious, and yet I think it's often neglected, and that's prayer and reflection. And I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that we tend to be reactionary instead of stepping back and thinking through and praying through how God wants us to respond. So we want to go vertical first. And one of the things we want to do is we want to ask God for wisdom, right? We've been talking about the categories of people: wise, foolish, evil. We've been talking about how to interact with those people differently. So that's going to require a lot of understanding, knowledge, wisdom, discernment that are all given generously by God through the Holy Spirit. And then I think also we have to examine our motivations. We need to ask God to reveal, what's my heart behind this? And we've talked some about responding out of some of those primary kind of ways of fear. I would say fleshly ways, fear, sinful fear, selfishness, or pride. And we need to ask God, is there a wrong motivation here, or am I being motivated out of love?
So as we've prayed and thought and wrestled with the Spirit, then we do encourage people to plan, because I think boundaries require a lot of intentionality. So come up with a plan. Think about the fact that boundaries can be physical, like your personal space. They can be verbal, like using no or I statements. And they can be emotional, where we would create emotional distance where it's needed. So we want to be really measured and intentional in creating boundaries. We're saying, don't use a sledgehammer when a screwdriver will do.
That's right. Know your tools in your toolbox and which one is for which situation. Yeah, and I think sometimes, that old adage, we fail to plan when we plan to fail. Anyhow, you know how it goes. I get so confused.
You got it right.
My mother's German, and I feel like all the little sayings in life, I get so twisted. I'm going to blame her. Oh, she still says really funny things sometimes. I'm like, yep, that's where I get it from. But, I don't even know where I was going with that, Alex. Let's just move on. Okay, the next...
Have a plan. Have a plan.
Have a plan, yes. Don't go willy-nilly, because you need to have a plan. And so often taking the time to even write out a plan is so helpful, because you're going to have to continue to go back to your plan. It needs to be a living document. You can refine that plan. But I think to have a plan, you can also see growth in yourself and look for growth in the other person and make adjustments. The plan is not wooden. The plan needs to be flexible as God moves and you change, and maybe the other person changes for the better or the worse. All right, number 3 on practical steps. We talked about this really at length, I think, in the last podcast, but getting counsel from wise others. And we said not too many people, and make sure that it's somebody who's not emotionally entangled, somebody who will take the time to listen to everything and walk a journey with you in this relationship. And then, somebody who will be patient with you as you grow. So I know in my own life, just having had a son with an addiction issue over a very long period of time, I desperately needed the wise counsel of others. And so often the waters just felt so muddied. I couldn't see. My own emotions as a mother were involved. There was a lot of back and forth. There was a lot of examining fruit. This season seemed good and then falling off the bandwagon. And then the next season was terrible and certainly no wisdom. But is this person being foolish? What kind of fool? And is this actually evil? And what's going on? And and even before we got on, I'm wrestling with the situation right now in my life, and you and Malia were giving me some good counsel because it gets so blurry. And I think our Christian heart is that we want to move very quickly back into relationship with people and believing the best about people and wanting to help people and jump in. And we really need other people either to encourage us to move forward when that's needed or to press the brakes when that's needed.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's really good, and I think in life I have really benefited. I think you said this last episode, with people who've been willing to walk long term in relationships, with difficult relationships that are hard to untangle, and they know the history. Like they're not coming in and out, but they know the history, and that history, it gives them a bigger perspective, and I think it also gives them some what's the word? Like they're emotionally invested in it with me. A lot of times these people love the person that I'm struggling with, and
invested but not entangled. Yes. I think that's a good differentiation to make because we're entangled a lot of times, and can't differentiate a whole lot.
Yeah, that's a good distinction.
I think that's good.
So when it comes time to set the boundary, we are going to talk about how to communicate clearly. We want to communicate clearly. We want to speak the truth in love, as Ephesians 4 calls believers to do. And so first we would say that setting boundaries should be done with love and compassion, not harshness or judgment, which is just rolls off the tongue. It's so easy to say. And what I find for all of us is that because boundaries feel uncomfortable, we tend to come off more harsh, more judgmental than we want to or even realize that we do because of our own discomfort in setting them. And I tell people a lot that when we're new to setting boundaries in our relationships, we're going to feel like toddlers that stumble and fall and step on people's toes and drop things and break things because it's a new skill that we're learning. It is a skill to be able to set boundaries well. And so we need to give grace to ourselves, and we also need to plan for ways that we can try to temper that discomfort that we feel.
Yeah. Well, I also think we need to remember that we're not changing the other person. We're responding. We're making the change, right, of what's acceptable or not acceptable and deciding that. And we're going to choose ahead of time, going back to that idea of planning instead of reacting in the moment. Yeah. So that I think so often if we don't plan ahead, then we do end up being very reactionary, just spouting off. And that planning piece is planning within yourself and with others is so important before you go and communicate this with somebody else.
Yeah, communicating clearly also means that we need to be simple and direct. And I think this is where we need a lot of skill. To be simple and direct without being harsh is tricky. But what I find is people want to talk a lot, explain a lot, or defend themselves. And I really encourage people to talk less and not more. And that also might mean that we find ourselves repeating what we said because we don't want to get drawn into other arguments or other unnecessary explaining. So we want to try to be simple and direct and often repeat ourselves.
I know for me, I'm an expander of words. as everybody knows. And so when I go to talk with somebody, it can just be a lot of words. And now I've confused them and myself about what I'm even saying.
The boundary gets lost in the conversation.
Gets so lost, exactly. Especially because I'm trying to oftentimes make it so palatable, right? And so I'm putting all these words around and it's like, I don't even know what you said. And so now nothing's going to change. And I'm frustrated. I think also part of the communication is that sometimes we may have to put something in writing. But we need to be careful if we do that, right? Again, writing doesn't always come across with kindness or compassion. It can seem super direct. But I would say sometimes you may need to have your written boundaries in front of you when you go to talk with somebody. I think that could be really helpful. Or I've done this with people, sent them an email saying, hey, could we talk about these things? And here's what I'd like to talk about, or here's what I'd like to do. So it gives them a little of a heads up. Particularly if we're talking about somebody who's wise, a wise, safe person in our life that we can sit down with. And then I think stay with the point and don't go into too many issues, because I think, again, for somebody who's a talker like me, I start off, I have 3 points and they make babies that make babies that make babies, and 3 points just went to 24 points. And again, now we're lost in the conversation.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. I think that the issue of whether to write is a really hard one. And I think it requires a lot of wisdom to know whether to put these things in writing, because there is the opportunity for them to be weaponized and for words to be weaponized. But the flip side is there is a lot more precision and intentionality when we're able to write something down. And particularly if in this relationship we're known to get drawn into unnecessary arguments, it can be helpful. So I really love your strategy of kind of sending the warning shot email across the bow and let that prepare the heart of the other person as well as your own. And I think it's just good to remember in communicating clearly that we're not policing another person. We're not trying to set the boundary in a way that lets them feel like we're hovering, always watching. We're just providing an opportunity for a loved one to come into wisdom and to choose wisdom over folly.
Yeah, and there's a way that we just teach and suggest that people actually engage with actual verbiage that can be really helpful. And it's using these I statements to express needs and limits, not you, but I, right? So it just kind of disarms the person. So this pattern is like, I feel, however you feel, right, about whatever the situation, because, and then I need fill in the blank. So of course, the I feel is using the feeling words, right? And I think oftentimes, again, going back to taking some time to respond and not react, like what are the feelings? And being able to articulate that feeling well, but not actually, what am I trying to say? Like not in a place where you're actually going to respond with that feeling. Because I think in reaction, it's like, if I feel angry, well, now I'm responding in an angry way,
right,
which is very unhelpful. But if I can say that really hurts my feelings, or making me feel misunderstood, or feel angry, or feel sad,
right,
about is you're just going to describe the situation. And I think going back to what we've said, like depending on the kind of person you're dealing with, how much description, depending on where you are in the warning, kind of the warning system, how much you're describing, because this is where we're just talking about impact. Some indication. And so often this can move the needle for somebody where just describing the situation won't. I think it also it can be weaponized as well, right? And then and this is where we keep talking about that boundaries are this invitation. It's not a demand. I can't make you do anything, but I'm inviting you to respond in a specific way that actually is going to improve our relationship.
Yeah. So we thought it might be helpful to give some examples of this so it doesn't feel so ambiguous, but it might sound something like this. I feel very apprehensive about planning the holidays this year because last year was really difficult for me. Would you please tell me if you would prefer for us to get together on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day? So we're given two options. There's a boundary in just only having two options. There's very precise information given, and there's still some choice being given here, right? By giving two options. So like that one.
Yeah. The next one is I feel very anxious about our family vacation because my family has a lot going on. We will only be able to stay for 3 days. And in this one, you're just setting some limitations. You're not asking for input, but you already know, you've already thought, you've already talked to whoever in your family maybe is a part of the decision-making process as well. And so I don't think this leaves, a lot of room for argument, which is nice, particularly the more complicated the relationship is and the less wisdom you have with someone, you have to start kind of narrowing, I think, the points you're making and the request of I need.
Yeah.
The I need becomes, I think, more specific.
Right. And I also say we said that because is the place where that's where sometimes you are revealing something about yourself. And I feel if the relationship is particularly unsafe, you may take that out. You may just say, I feel really anxious about our family vacation. We're only going to be able to stay for 3 days. Because if giving that information of my family has a lot going on is just going to start an argument of, what do you mean you have a lot going on? And don't we all have a lot going on? Yes. Like if that's that, if you have, so that's the example of you give less and less information as you see how information is handled.
That's right.
The last one we would say is that last comment really hurt because you made a pretty big assumption about me. I think if you had asked me questions instead of assuming, we could have a more beneficial conversation for both of us. So this is what we call a verbal boundary. It's not physical or about time or space, but we're just asking for something to happen within the conversation to try to change the tone and the way that a conversation goes.
Okay. Well, next we want to talk about the next practical step is to start small. If this is a new concept or a new response for you, or if you feel frail or weak because what you're up against is a very foolish person or even an evil person, you're really struggling, or even with wise people, you're struggling because maybe you're a people pleaser and you have a really hard time. I think just begin with one specific area of your life to establish boundaries. And so don't despise the small things. Again, we talk about this as a skill. It's a muscle that has to be exercised. And the more you exercise it with wisdom and with the motivation of love and by calling on the Lord and the power of the Holy Spirit, the stronger you're going to get.
Yeah, even when you say that, Brenda, it just reminds me of so many conversations I've had with people who go into a conversation and they'll say, oh yeah, I can set boundaries in this relationship. And they'll set a small boundary and then come back to counseling. And what we have to unpack is all the fear and anxiety and apprehension that comes up in them because they realize that they believe in their minds that they can, but they maybe haven't ever done it in a relationship and they haven't asked for something small. They haven't revealed themselves. And so what we tend to have to unpack is that effect on them. And so sometimes starting small is because of our own frailty and like you said, we feel weak, maybe physically, it may be a physically frail season, but also emotionally because it's just not something we have introduced into the relationship and we don't know if the relationship can hold it. And so then we have to process back through that. Yeah.
Well, and I think that just kind of leads us into the next point, and that is to be consistent. Because sometimes in order to be consistent, you have to start small.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, true.
Like have some wins.
Yes.
And then grow from there. And again, depending on what kind of person, wise, full, or evil, I mean, this all depends on how small you can start. And the more foolish or evil a person is, the more resistance you're going to get. So consistency is going to be harder. It's going to be harder to maintain your boundaries with the grace and firmness if you're being pushed against without either capitulating or maybe without falling in the other ditch, which might be retaliating yourself.
You've said this several times in this episode that I don't know that we've really said enough about it, that we do set boundaries with wise people, and that can be hard to remember. And it was reminding me of this one with my children becoming adults and starting to engage in a different relationship. It's much more, I have one married, one firmly in her own career, and we're establishing this adult to adult relationship. And last year we went to the beach for Thanksgiving, And I made this big, bold decision. It sounds so funny. Talk about starting small. To ask everyone to plan and purchase the groceries for a meal in the weekend that we were gone. I don't know why that felt like such a big ask. Even later, both the girls were like, Mom, seriously, it's one meal. We're fine. But I'm the mom. And so it felt like something that I should do. And I talked about it with my husband. And I was like, it really just takes so much off my plate mentally if everybody just would take a meal. And I gave everybody breakfast. I didn't want to do breakfast, so I divvied out breakfast each day. And it was just so funny that I was the one who had so much anxiety for that. And it was even hard for me to realize it was a boundary of sorts, because I felt like it was this huge ask, but it was actually a boundary. It was a boundary for me saying, I'm not going to fix every meal and buy all the food for the entire weekend. I'm going to invite you into this with me. And it was funny because the only person struggling with it was me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm the one that had to undo all the thoughts about what it meant to be a good mom and to let them just be adults. And so, but it is interesting that even when we are setting boundaries with wise people, we'll have some measure of anxiety and some feelings to work through.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt.
Okay, these last two are hard. We want to also, as we're setting boundaries, plan for resistance. So we want to plan for how we're going to respond when and if the boundaries are not met with respect. So even in my little example, it made me feel better to have this explanation or this little talk. I never had to give it, but because I was thankfully dealing with wise people. But often with foolish or evil people, we're going to have to plan for how we're going to respond if our boundaries are not met with respect, and we need to anticipate that. I think it will bring some anxiety down in our own hearts, and it will help us not to be reactive in the moment when that happens. We can choose a response ahead of time. And then we also want to realize that throughout all of this boundary setting, we want to extend grace, that we need to be patient and understanding with ourselves and with the other person involved, because not everyone will immediately accept or understand our boundaries, but that doesn't always mean that they won't eventually. So we want to learn how to extend grace and to be able to be patient and persevere in relationship when it may not immediately be accepted.
Yeah. Well, good. I think there's some good framework. We haven't given, a magic bullet, so to speak, but hopefully some framework there to process, to organize, to communicate good and healthy boundaries, to promote love in relationships. But what we want to talk about now are there some times that we don't or shouldn't communicate boundaries? Not every limit requires a formal statement or telling someone. And I'm really thinking, first and foremost, we talk about wise relationships. I don't go to my husband and say, I am setting up a boundary right now.
Right.
It's like, if I do that, I'm going to create a lot more issues, right? Because he is a wise person and he will adjust to the light. So I think when we talk about boundaries and what we don't have to communicate, because I think some people feel like they have to be so boundaried, right? And they're telling everybody, well, I won't do this and I won't do this and you need to right? And we know somebody like that. All of us know somebody like that, and it's not pretty and it's not loving So I think we don't have to always communicate boundaries. I think the way we live our lives, the way we just invite people into godly, skillful, wise, mutual, loving relationships is a form of setting boundaries within a relationship without saying we're setting boundaries. Yeah. But there are a few times that we want to really think about from the standpoint of the wisest and safest path with some people is going to quietly adjust what you do and show up doing it and not necessarily communicating about it, right? So this is going to be true with an evil person who is destructive. That person, we don't want to announce what we're going to do. We most likely want to silently enforce this because for our safety and for our protection, because these people, as we've said, they don't really have a conscience a lot of times, or they don't act like they have much of a conscience, and they don't mind hurting you. And so what will happen if you verbalize your boundaries to a person who's in that category of harmful, they'll weaponize those boundaries against you, and they may accuse you of being unloving and shaming you because you're not a very good Christian. And that's very unloving, right?
Right.
They might retaliate, and now they know how to punish you. Man, they've got your game plan, and they're going to be one step ahead of you, or they're going to know how to get back at you. They may manipulate outcomes. They'll use your boundaries to make you feel guilty, and even maybe to make you look like the bad one or the irresponsible one. And then I think also, they'll control the narrative by twisting your self-protection and desire to honor that proof that you're the problem.
Right.
I'm not the problem. I'm not setting boundaries on you. You're the one, that's so wrapped up with you. And that just becomes kind of a narrative they can push to make themselves look better and their actions look better.
Yeah. I think the other time that we may choose not to communicate boundaries is when we believe that the communication itself is just going to feed the foolishness or the folly. And what I mean by that is there are times when people love conflict and they don't love reconciliation. And so the more I communicate, the deeper we get into the conflict. It just adds more fuel to the fire. My husband says it feeds the beast. And we realize that more communication just allows it to keep going and going. Or we realize somebody won't fight fair, and I think that's part of what you were talking about earlier. They bring up the past, they call names, they retaliate. And so we just recognize that we're going to have to quietly put boundaries in place and not communicate them clearly.
Yeah. And I think, just maybe this kind of plays in a little bit to that too, but sometimes the boundaries are more for us, right? They're like, we just need to know what they are. We need to know what our limits are. And so they just need to be lived out with whatever person we're in front of. So the boundary changes is really in our own behavior and our own heart for almost our own sake. And it's not necessary to communicate it to the other person. And sometimes we just need to consistently show up in certain relationships a certain way because that's what protects and honors the relationship and the glory of God.
Yeah, I think about, I've talked to a lot of people who have recognized that like family holidays or special occasions when they're going to be with family, that they've realized like after 2 nights things start to devolve. And so they've just set this quiet boundary that we're only going to spend 2 nights at a family member's house. And even though they may have to engage in specific conversations at some point about arrangements, they don't go into the next family gathering and saying, hear ye, from now on, we are only spending 2 nights at your house. So there's a quiet way to do that may cause future conversations, but it doesn't need to be communicated as this big set in stone boundary. And I think it also gives some space for some flexibility in responding to specific situations when we haven't drawn this deep line in the sand. So there's certainly places to not communicate boundaries, like you said, that we just live them. Right,
exactly. All right, Alex. Well, I think this is going to wrap up this session on how to set boundaries. So just to summarize very quickly, we want to pray first and take it vertical. We want to plan wisely and even spend some time writing that plan out and really evaluating what we're dealing with. We want to seek wise counsel from those who will walk a journey with us. And I think I wanted to say earlier, I think this is one of the benefits of lay counseling and just discipleship and spiritual friendships. We're professional counselors, so got, all about that. But I just think that missing component so much in the church today are just those lifelong or long-term friendships that when somebody steps back into your life, they can step back in where you are struggling in your relationships and continue to help you. Communicate clearly and then discerning when it's not appropriate or not necessary to share your boundaries.
We just want to remind people that with each of these episodes on boundaries, we're making a worksheet available on our website, and you can sign up for the email to get those. And that our next episode is going to unpack what are some of the challenges, the personal challenges of setting boundaries.